Despair is a tool of empire. If they exhaust us, they can keep us down. If you feel hopeless, that's on purpose. So, honey, look around, yeah, at all of the love that's been poured into you to get you this far. The love of all your ancestors and the light of every star.
Welcome to Soul Connections. I'm Emily.
Aryn.
And I'm Dani.
Soul Connections is a podcast about enchanting relationships with the human, more than human, and divine. We invite you to gather with us as the sun makes their annual pilgrimage through the zodiac. Each month, we'll bring you Astro Church sermons and illuminating conversations with radiant guests. Together, we'll make meaning out of the mystery through archetypes, patterns, and storytelling. Today is February 17th, 2025, Moon Day, and it is the last day of Aquarius season. And today we have another Astro Church sermon for you. So I'd love to hand it over to Dani.
Yeah. Well, Astro Church is a space where we use astrology, mythology, tarot, and storytelling to explore our world. We place Astro Church at the end of the season to reflect on our lived experiences rather than try to predict them. We're trying to find meaning in what we've been through, connecting deeply to the stories that we're living in, and hopefully discovering some magic and hope for the future. And if we could just introduce ourselves, I and our big threes. So I'm Dani. I use she with a capital S or they pronouns. And my big threes, I'm an Aries sun, Pisces moon, and Libra rising. Aryn, do you want to go next?
Sure. I use they, them pronouns, and my big three are my Capricorn sun and rising with a Taurus.
And I'm Emily. I use she, her pronouns, and I have a Taurus sun, Gemini moon, and Leo rising.
Awesome. Aryn, do you want to preview the episode for everybody?
Yes. So today's Astro Church episode, we are focusing on Aquarius season, reflecting near the end of it. We'll be talking about Saturn and Pisces, which rules this Sun and Aquarius season. We're also going to talk about Uranus and Taurus as well, and also how those two planets are relating to each other. Our tarot connection for today is the Knight of Cups, and we're going to share an excerpt or a little story time with Peter Pan and the Lost Boys and talk about how that story relates to the astrology of the moment. Some of the big themes that we'll be diving into and reflecting on are visionary leadership and collective action, and as well as seen through the sea of illusion and deception, and also the healing power of connection as well. So before we dive into all those interesting themes, we're going to do what we call universal shoutouts. Before I explain what that is, I'd like all of us to just take a deep breath together. So if we want to ground ourselves, put our feet on the ground, take a big inhale, and exhale through our mouths. Universal shoutouts are a time for us to talk about who and what we're holding space for, whether that's personal, people that we know, or people that we don't know, and just collective energy that we want to share out. We also invite our listeners to send us shoutouts, and I'll talk more about how to do that later. But Dani, would you like to start with your universal shoutout?
Sure. I pulled the Knight of Cups for the card of the day. Little spoiler alert. And the Knight of Cups is very much associated with my dog who passed last spring, Mojo. So Mojo's been present for me a lot, and I still carry so much grief around that loss. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to get over it. It's one of the greatest loves of my whole life was that dog. So I just want to throw out some energy to Mojo, my Knight of Cups, the protector and visionary and compassionate lover that he was. And is. in my heart and in my life, you know.
Mojo continues on. I can go next. Okay. Similar to Dani, my beloved Coco, which is K-O-K-O, she was the first bunny that I ever had. I adopted her when I was 22 years old, just fresh new grad out of college. And she was with me until 2022. And so her Rainbow Bridge anniversary was just on February 11th during Aquarius season. And it was her 3-year anniversary of her passing, and like Dani and Dani's relationship to Mojo, that like Coco, just like our spirits, our souls just have a profound connection that continues on. So just wanted to send a universal shout out to Coco, who I also have been feeling the presence of, especially closer to her death anniversary. So universal shout out to Coco.
Thank you too for sharing those. We also wanted to send a shout out in a more collective sense. There's been a lot of stuff going on politically that is impacting people directly. Specifically, anybody impacted by the proposed funding freezes by the Trump administration, such as food stamps. I also believe like healthcare access was also a little bit tricky with that as well, and just other government assistance to survive. People also who are losing their jobs, and also those that are impacted by access to information, especially because language is being censored, especially specifically targeted at minority groups, gender minority groups, sexuality minority groups, and racial minority groups too around DEI. So I wanted to do the universal shout out waves to anybody impacted by those directly. So we did our universal shout outs. Now we're going to close with a group breath and get into our story connection. So feel free to ground yourself again, shoulders back, inhale through your nose. Exhale through your mouth. Dani, would you like to share our story connection for today?
In a land where time stands still and no one grows old, a group of misfits, dreamers, and outcasts were drawn together by the unshakable belief in a life lived freely, where the rules of the old order held no weight. There was one among them who they often followed, not as their ruler in the traditional sense, with laws or punishments, but as their leader, guided by his unwavering devotion to their freedom. He was not above them, nor did he claim to own their allegiance. In this group of wild ones, their loyalty was based in a sense of belonging. Peter Pan embodied the spirit of Neverland, moving like the wind, carrying only the strength of his vision and sovereignty of his spirit. His laughter was a battle cry, a daring reminder of what was possible. His presence called something alive in the Lost Boys. As he lifted them, they too lifted him. But beyond the forests and hidden glades where they made their home, there was a force that sought to destroy their way of life. A man of power, hardened by time and obsessed with order, could not stand their existence. To him, they were a threat, proof that the world could be shaped by something other than fear and force. And so he waged war against them, determined to bring them under his rule. Yet these free spirits did not fight him on his terms. They did not march in lines or obey the rules of war. Instead, they used what he could never understand: mischief, illusions, the art of unpredictability. They turned his own weapons against him, slipping through his grasp like water through clenched fists. Where he relied on force, they relied on belief. Where he sought to impose tyranny, they created something new. There came a day when he captured them, believing at last that he had won. But even in cages, they dreamed. And when the moment was right, when his arrogance blinded him, they unraveled his power from within, striking through the illusion of limitation, of the singular way of life he represented, of the need to grow up. The Lost Boys triumphed over Captain Hook, not with brute strength, but by turning his own illusions against him. Trapped by his rigid view of the world, his ego and pride became his downfall, leaving him unable to see beyond the narrow reality he had built for himself. And so the Lost Boys remained free, not because they defeated their enemy, but because they could never be tamed. No one among them needed a throne. Their vision was collective. As long as there were those who imagined a different world, as long as there were voices that sang of something beyond what is, the spirit of freedom would endure. The dream of a world where all could live in harmony, express themselves fully, and exist with true autonomy. We're going to get a little bit more into that story later. But let's talk about our tarot connection for the day. So I mentioned earlier I had pulled the Knight of Cups. Knights in the tarot, they are one of the what are they called again? Why am I blanking on the name? There's the minor arcana. There are minor arcana. Court cards. They're a court card. They come after the pages. So the page represents sort of like the distillation of whatever element that is. So cups is water. Knights always represent kind of the mutable of that element. And so when we talk about mutable, we're talking about, I'm referencing astrology and how elements are moved, how they move energy. And so mutable signs move energy back and forth. There's like a duality to mutable energy. And with cups, that's water. The mutable water sign is Pisces. So I think it's important to keep that in mind, that the Knight of Cups has some Piscean themes. And in Aquarius season, which is ruled by Saturn currently is in Pisces. We've been talking about Pisces in our Capricorn episode. We're going to be talking about Pisces as we move into Pisces season. Pisces is some pretty big Pisces energy in the stars right now. And the Knight of Cups really represents that energy. Knights are also always the air element in the tarot, because again, they move things. So we're dealing with air and water, air of water. How does that air navigate through the depths of the water? Water being our emotional energy, our emotional bodies, the unspoken, the unseen, the mysterious, the illusions, and air being discernment and intellect and our mental energy, our thoughts, our narratives. So, there's an element with the Knight of Cups of how we are moving. Knights are always seen moving on a horse or, on a chariot of some kind. How are we moving through that element? And so the knight, if you can imagine the knight moving through water, you have to go with the flow a little bit more. You have to allow for space and time for things. There's more emotional energy, especially when we're talking about Pisces energy, because Pisces, we have Mercury in Pisces right now. Mercury likes to discern things, cut through things, get to the point. Pisces is free-flowing, mutable water all over the place, dream world. Everything is possible with Pisces energy. Everything is connected with Pisces energy. So how does an air element or a night element or a swords element, how does that discernment archetype move through that? And it's creatively, it's compassionately, it's slowly if it needs to be, it's playfully. There's some playful energy to that night. Fluid, we see the Knight of Cups as being described as a romantic and a dreamer. Sometimes that's included with being there being illusions around romance and dreaminess. Sometimes that has to do with getting too caught up in the story of it all and not being able to see the reality. But I really see the Knight as a movement oriented card in general for all four Knights. And in water, to me, you're moving into mastery in the Knight. You were ready in the page. You had the seed planted in the page. Now you're moving into the Queen and King. And when you get to the Queen and King, there's mastery of that water element. So we are dealing in this world with some emotionally charged waters. And so there's a sense of needing to balance sight and knowing what comes next with also just not knowing what's coming next, with some kind of mystery. Also holding space for very real fear, terror, heartbreak, And also having belief in possibility. I think that with all the stuff in Pisces, the huge emphasis on Pisces energy right before we move into hard-hitting Aries energy, like we need to believe, it's extremely important. And the night can help us to navigate those waters of fear and illusion, to get to a place of being truly rooted in reality, our values, autonomy, and also having belief in something greater, not being limited by, certain perceptions, and especially by the illusions that the powers that be are trying to send to us right now. There's like an element of discerning through that. And part of that includes holding space for our fear and our emotional energy and understanding what that means. So I will say, the last thing I will say, like, compassionate, gentle, creative movement is the Knight of Swords. The Knight of Cups. Knight of Cups. Emily, do you want to talk about Aquarius?
Absolutely. Thank you for introducing the Knight of Cups. I'm already picking up some overlaps with Aquarius. So I am going to talk about Aquarius, which is the season that we are in, and it is the solar season that we are reflecting upon. And so we want to talk more about the Aquarius archetype. So Aquarius is one, I wanted to make a connection between the Knight of Cups being air and water, and what is Aquarius's symbol but the water bearer, the person who is traveling miles, walking miles with a heavy vessel to fill up water from the local watering hole to carry back to their community, and bring that nourishment, bring those nourishing waters to their community, to the collective. But Aquarius, often commonly mistaken for a water sign because of the water bearer symbol, Aquarius is actually an air sign. An air sign that is ruled by Saturn in traditional astrology and Uranus in modern astrology. And we really do pick up both Uranian and Saturnian influences within Aquarius. So Aquarius is the fixed air sign. So again, the air element being about the mental body, being about our social relationships, our connections, and especially in Aquarius, with it being Saturn, our social structures is a big thing, right? When we say the collective, that is, that's a social structure of how we relate to people on a mass scale or on a community scale, smaller community scales as well. So some of the kind of key things to keep in mind with Aquarius, again, one more thing, fixed nature, grounding, stabilizing, fixed, solid, like very pure air energy. So some of the like keywords, or at least words that come up for us when we think of Aquarius, the innovator, again, that Uranian influence, the visionary, the organizer, the rebel, and the architect of new social paradigms. Aquarius themes really impact the collective and also autonomy within the collective, and the autonomy or like self-determination of people collectively, right? Technology, AI, technological advancements, especially, and the evolution of technology, especially when we get to the digital age, like all of these technological advancements that connect us socially, social media, email, right? Like even computers, cell phones, all of these things really create this global network that connects all humans across the globes that at least have access to these digital systems, which are becoming more and more accessible. I mean, another rabbit hole to open up, but there's a lot of ways to connect right now. And that's very Aquarian, to be connected to so many people, right? One thing about Aquarius is definitely a future pacing. There is a level of intellect with Aquarius. Some Aquarius placements, like someone who can really devote to an area of study, and the level of like mental stamina and mental fortitude and mental, I would say, like, mental body with Saturn, mental, just grit almost. Like, ooh, I'm going to take on this Saturnian challenge of learning, right? Of almost like an academic style of intellectual like mastery, quote unquote, or, level of knowledge. Feels very Aquarian. And then when we think about Aquarius, it's really also helpful to look at the zodiac signs opposite, because that also really clues us in, right? Like they're on a spectrum, and two zodiac signs that are opposites in that oppositional relationship, they're kind of the two ends of the polarity, but there's this beautiful infinite spectrum between them, and they flow in and out, and they really balance each other out. So the opposite of Aquarius is Leo. And so when the sun, who rules Leo, that is their home sign. And how I like to think about the sun in astrology is that represents our unique, authentic expression. That light, that like consciousness energy we have within us, that spirit that like shines out as an expression of who we are. That's very solar and sun to me. So the sun in Leo is very much powerfully in that essence of I am in my authenticity, in my unique self-expression, and I, feel confident to express that out, right? And then we have Aquarius, the opposite of that, ruled by Saturn, where we kind of go from like pure self-expression and authenticity in Leo to now we have this huge social structure and collective of unique expressions to fit together, right? Like how does the self interact with the collective? What are those group dynamics? So looking at the Leo Aquarius opposition here, Aquarius really can be like a struggle or the challenge that comes with being part of a group, right? When we have many unique, authentic expressions that have their own opinions, have their own beliefs, have their own experiences, have their own ways of moving through the world. And then we show up collectively, and then we start to see how these unique expressions interact. And that can lead to beautiful, joyful, loving connection. And it can lead to harm and frustration and hurt feelings. So Aquarius does really struggle with feelings of not belonging to the group. That can definitely be an Aquarian struggle, or feeling like they're on the outs. They're on the outside looking in at the sun, Leo being opposite, being the sun. So we can look to Saturn, the ruler of Aquarius, to find a representation of the struggle, but also the medicine. So the struggle of that Saturn adds a pressure, like a heaviness, a level of responsibility, a pressure, right? Like there's kind of like this Saturn part of Aquarius that is the one evaluating, if I'm not on the outside looking in, how am I fitting in with all of these other people, right? How does my energy compare to theirs? Like, how do I think about myself in comparison to how I think about these other people that I'm in a dynamic with? And then the sun, right? Then the medicine of that, Saturn can come in and create some structures. Well, how do we create structures within our communities, within our, social networks that are creating, because also Aquarius does want the collective to be liberated. Like I really like that Uranus, again, I'm going to reference Aryn's piece. Saturn is liberation, right? Like Saturn and Uranus beyond kind of these oppressive paradigms, they all are about liberation and equity for all, true equity, everyone has everything they need. And so the medicine of Saturn can really, and Aquarius can really be thinking about, what are the equitable social structures that allow everyone to express themselves authentically, for it to be safe for everyone to stand in their power. And not that it won't be messy and there won't be, right, things that have to be worked out, but it doesn't need to result in actual violence and harm like it is now. So wanted to pause there and see what else is coming up about Aquarius for you too.
I just think when you're talking about the tension between being a part of the group, but then also Aquarius feeling sort of outside of it, kind of reminds me of that meme where it's they don't know meme of the guy in the corner watching people dancing. To me, that feels like Aquarius, where they don't know these things. And I think sometimes Aquarius is so good at seeing the big picture and like analyzing and distilling things that sometimes it can almost make them feel like isolated or like they're like overly aware of like what isn't working or what's wrong that they need to fix, which is a very Saturnian mindset to be able to see those things that sometimes, and I'm speaking specifically of people with Aquarius placements in their personal planets, where there's almost this feeling of like aloneness or isolation or being almost too aware for your own good or too aware so that like things aren't as fun or you can't dance at the party because you're thinking about, oh my God, there's so many social problems and equity that we need to fix. And so something about the Leo axis of if these planets are in conversation or these signs, Leo's like, all right, lighten up. Like, yes, that's true. And also like we can still have fun and we can party and we can like be radiant and joyful. And then Aquarius reminds Leo, like, that's not all that life is. And that sometimes you need to care about what goes on behind the scenes to make that performance possible. So really analyzing and thinking about those two energies together, really important, especially because Leo is very much like of the spotlight, and Aquarians, especially Aquarius suns, because the sun is in detriment in Aquarius, there's almost this feeling of like, I'm uncomfortable in the spotlight. Like I'm very uncomfortable. And I think that there's something really charming about that too, because Aquarian sun people tend to be like very, I guess like authentic or sincere, or like there's not as much, like their image is really interesting in how they see themselves in that way. There's a humility and a humbleness to it that Leo sometimes needs a reminder of as well. But there's also like the negative side if it's taken too far. There's almost this like challenge or even like struggle with self-esteem or struggle with like putting themselves out there because there's this fear that maybe they're perceived wrong or incorrectly. I don't know. I also see some tension with that.
You know, everything you said, I'm like, yes, like both of you, everything you were saying, I was literally nodding my head the entire time. This whole thing with Aqua, like, yes, they're uncomfortable being seen. And also they tend to be people that people are drawn to and attracted to, like Aquarius, especially Aquarius sun energy. There is like this, and it is uncomfortable. Like any of Aquarius personal placement, I feel like is pretty uncomfortable. Like it's because you're fixed air, you're constantly like holding the like dichotomy of like living in a collective world as an individual. You know what I'm saying? And you're like, and you have to somehow cognitively be able to hold that and negotiate that. And that is really challenging. And so I do actually think that Aquarius energy can point to like social anxiety stuff, you know, because there's such a deep, like my mom is an Aquarius moon, and it's just like this deep feeling of like duty to do the right thing, to be there for the collective. You know, there's the Saturnian sense of responsibility that comes in with some of that stuff. And also everyone has a need to be seen. With every human being does have some sort of need. Now, that doesn't mean that some people are more comfortable or uncomfortable with, you know, it can be very uncomfortable to be seen, you know, and also like, sometimes I see Aquarius energy when it's being unskillful as being like cold and like purposefully distancing themselves from the group and from things, being, I'm not mainstream. I'm too cool for that. I'm just different than everyone. When like the reality that you come to when you get to the last sign of the zodiac, which is Pisces, is that we actually all are connected to each other and have a lot of things in common. And a lot of the things we feel as human beings are shared experiences. And I do think skillful Aquarius energy knows how to kind of negotiate those two realities. But it's a hard thing to get to. So I also agree that Saturn is both the description of the problem, but also a medicine for it, you know, that's something Emily said earlier. And I just really want to emphasize that the like Saturnian nature of Aquarius, I think of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, who is an Aquarius. She has her Scooby Gang behind her that are like able to help her out when she needs help. And she was able to build that for herself, but she still holds the discomfort of being the chosen one and all that stuff, so, I'll stop there, Emily. I know we have to, Aryn, I think you were going through stuff. We have to talk about Saturn archetypes. So maybe we move into that.
Yeah, I thought it would be a good segue since you started talking about Pisces, to
Yeah.
just this Aquarius season that we are now at the tail end of. So by the time folks listen to this, we will be, out of Aquarius season and into Pisces season. But this is the second month in a row that we have a very heavy Saturn and Pisces influence over this collective Aquarian energy. Because last season was Capricorn season, which is one sign that Saturn rules. This month was Aquarius season, which is the other sign that Saturn rules. So Saturn and Pisces really is, I think, rippling out and really causing that kind of deep, like that deeper emotional, deeper spiritual connection that the collective has, that maybe like Saturn and Aquarius on their own has a harder time connecting to, but Aquarius, through the filter of Saturn and Pisces, there's more of that Piscean influence. So yeah, I'm curious, Aryn, as our resident Saturn and Pisces person, I'm curious what thoughts you have about that.
Thinking about how if we both have Capricorn and Aquarius season ruled by Saturn and Pisces, how we would distinguish them. And I think you started talking about that, Emily. And these thoughts are coming as I'm thinking them. So, yeah, there's something about like, to me, Capricorn versus Aquarius feels a little bit more embodied because it's an earth sign. So it's connected more to like tangible and like experiences that we can even see or like feel in our body. Not to say that Aquarius doesn't have those things, but if we're thinking of big picture, kind of like how would we distinguish these things? I almost wonder if Capricorn season was a little bit of a reckoning with like, how do all these like themes of being an individual and the collective, how does that feel in our bodies? How does that show up in our day-to-day lives? How does that show up in like maybe even how we nourish ourselves? And then I think Aquarius is kind of bringing in the sort of like more analytical, like thoughtful aspect of it, is like all of those things are filtered through our perspectives. And I think air signs, their magic is part of that, like their perception, how they frame things, how they talk about things. And Aquarius is very concise. And I also have a Mercury in Aquarius. And I think one of my strengths is the ability to really like narrow in on exactly what I want to say. Sometimes people even say I'm a little dry, but to me, like that's really important to get to the heart of something. And so I do think Aquarius does have this sort of problem solver vibe to it. But then it's also like, again, we got Saturn and Pisces, where Pisces, Dani brought up this idea of like everything is connected and like, yes, you can narrow in and focus in on these specific things, but then there's that process of like zooming out. And I was thinking about my Aquarius brother, who, it's funny because I'm a Capricorn and I'm very Saturnian and Capricorn, but he's like in a Capricorn moon with a bunch of Aquarius. Like his chart is just like Aquarius and Cap all together. I'm like, oh my God, are you more Saturnian than me? But one time he was describing how he processes emotions, and I'm like, this is the most Aquarian Capricorn moon shit. He was like, I feel an emotion and I detach from it and I look at it and I'm like, what is this emotion? Where is it coming from? Like, why am I feeling this? And then once he figured that out, he's like, I reattach and I let it in my body.
Wow.
I thought it was so funny because it was like so accurate to that reality. And also like the moon is in detriment in Capricorn too. So there's also like that level of like, yeah. So I just thought it was funny, this idea of Aquarian detachment. And part of it is a way to like try to understand or like filter it through your logical thought processes. So I just wanted to share that anecdote because I thought it was really funny. And part of how we understand these energies, at least for myself, is we think about who has these placements and how do they respond, and like how did their perspectives and emotions and stuff filter through that. And that's a really also helpful way of connecting with this energy. So I would encourage our listeners to think about, do they know Aquarius people? Do they have Aquarius placements? Where is Aquarius in their chart? And I think that's such a fun, engaging exercise to really think about what that energy means to you and how you filter that, because we all engage with it, whether or not we have an Aquarius sun or any Aquarius planets as well.
Yes, want to affirm that, because I will say, I think for me, the best way to learn astrology, which I'm assuming if our listeners are our communities here, you're interested in astrology and maybe you're learning it. So really applying it to your everyday life, right? Like Aryn said, like why we always, the three of us always share our big three at the beginning of this, of the recording, is because we're like, that's a way that we relate to people, right? Like how I love learning people's charts. If they're open to talking about it, and I'm like, yeah, I'm an astrologer, and they tell me their big three or show me their chart, then I can be like, ooh, here's what, here's how I relate to this. How do you relate to that? And then I start to kind of just like, can start to think about how when we talk about these transits and these big collective experiences, how do people with specific placements, like how does it affect them? How do they like respond to those things? All of that. So just wanted to affirm that that is a beautiful way to start to understand. So definitely think about the Aquarius people in your lives. And if you're an Aquarius, shout out, it's your birthday season, Aquarius sun. So you probably don't celebrate your birthday as much as you should. So happy birthday to the Aquarius suns, my sister, Sarah, and my friend Chelsea being two of those that I know. So I just wanted to wind us down on some of the big archetypes that we'll be discussing astrologically, the last one being Uranus and Taurus. Dani, would you be able to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So Uranus has been in Taurus for like 7 years now. It's going to leave shortly. But it, Taurus, I think about Uranus is the disruptor. It's the one that like sudden change, lightning strike, innovation. If Saturn represents the part of Aquarius that has to do with the structures and understanding the structures, then Uranus has to do with like breaking those structures, creating something new, setting off a new chain of events, like shifting cycles. And Uranus is the first planet outside of our visible sight, because Saturn is the boundary of our visible sight. So until the telescope was invented, at least in the history that we know of humanity, there were so many genocides and civilizations wiped out that I believe that other people at some point in history may have known about some of this stuff. But in our modern history and our modern understanding, like it wasn't until the telescope was invented that we were able to actually see that there was something beyond Saturn in our universe or in our solar system. And so Uranus essentially broke Saturn's chains, broke the boundaries. Saturn word is boundaries. Uranus breaks that boundary and breaks those chains. So I think of it as disruption and the breaker of chains. So if we associate that with a sign, it's a collective planet. So it does have impact on us in our charts personally, but more so if it's interacting with some sort of personal planet or one of our angles, like our rising sign or our midheaven or something like that. But it really does define collective stuff. And part of the reason is that it stays in one sign for a long time. So there's a lot of time to for change to happen. It's like a 7 to 8 year cycle in each sign. So in Taurus, if we think about Taurus archetypes, Taurus is an earth sign. It's fixed earth. And it really has to do with our resources. So I think very simplest way to think about it is our earth and the resources of our earth and the bodies that we have. And the symbol of Taurus is the bull, which has been throughout millennia been used as a symbol of abundance and the resources that we have. It's food, it's wealth. We have a bull on Wall Street, for example. So I also think of Taurus in association with money and with our financial like structures and systems and resources, really our financial resources. So if we put a collective planet like Uranus with the themes of Taurus, which are like resources, wealth, earth stuff, and we get the Uranus energy of disruption and breaking of chains, we have disruption of global food systems and our agriculture. There are also Uranus being the breaker of chains, like the rebellious one, movements around organic and regenerative agriculture, in opposition to like big agriculture or monocrop farming or things that are not as good for the environment. And climate catastrophes. So like big sudden changes in our climate, and climate cycles, changes in our financial system. Again, Taurus, the bull, Wall Street, major fluctuations in our currencies, inflation, also, crypto, Bitcoin, and the ever increasing value of that market based on, the Broligarchy that we're all living under. Also AI affecting climate change. I think that's a huge piece of it as well. AI being, their Uranus, like inventive technology archetype. But it drains our resources from the earth. It uses tons and tons of earth-based resources. And Emily, you wrote in here European farmers protesting. You want to talk about that a little bit? Because I don't know a ton about it. So
that was something I think that happened in the summer of 2024. And I believe it was I think it was the German farmers, I believe, but I might be misrepresenting that. But European farmers, potentially in Germany, I think it was related to like access to fuel, because how much farmers rely on fuel for their livelihoods to run their farms. So they collectively organized and went to like their government, entities, and literally had like tractors and trucks full of like manure, and like dumped the manure on these like government buildings or just outside of these government buildings as like in protest, and like lined up all these tractors around the government buildings. So it just felt very Uranus and Taurus to me.
Well, it also makes me think of the orcas. The orcas resisting, like that was so cool. And that to me feels very Uranus and Taurus. Like, no one expected the orcas to rise up. Like, or maybe some people did actually. I guess Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy does like start with the dolphins leaving Earth because they're actually an alien species. So, yeah, so that was Uranus and Taurus. I want to move on for time's sake. There's so much we could say about that, but I just want to highlight, we have Aquarius season, and the rulers of Aquarius are Uranus, which currently is in Taurus, and Saturn, which currently is in Pisces. So Aryn, do you want to kind of go into what's going on? Emily is going to put up her screen and share with us a chart of the new moon in Aquarius, which happened prior to the full moon. So Aryn, take it away. You want to talk about what we've been dealing with this last Aquarius season?
Yes, I'm going to give a big picture overview quickly about some of the major points, and then we could like look more specifically at the new moon and the full moon charts. But we've been in this Aquarius season, which typically when we say a sign season, we're talking about the sun. So the sun has been in Aquarius. As Dani said, it's ruled traditionally by Saturn and Pisces, and in modern astrology by Uranus. So Uranus is in Taurus right now. So during this time, Saturn in Pisces, Jupiter stationed direct. So Jupiter is in Gemini and spent a lot of time in retrograde, and finally we have that direct motion. So that happened during the season. Also, Aquarius season did begin with Sun conjunct Pluto, because Pluto recently moved into Aquarius. And I think when the Sun and Pluto come together, there's a level of intensity, There's maybe some ego tension because Pluto is digging up things beneath the surface, right? And the sun is something that illuminates and talks about energy and how we show up in that way. So that already, like, intensity is a big signature, just Aquarius alone, but with Pluto involved in that as well. And the sort of, I think the sun with conjunction of Pluto really illuminates the sort of themes collectively that we're experiencing. Because again, Pluto takes a really long time to move through signs, and it's a more collective sign. And then the sun comes in there and it really just like brings that to the surface and maybe gives us some illumination of the themes to develop there. We started with the new moon in Aquarius. This is a lot of Aquarius energy. So if you're looking visually at this chart, I'll describe it as well for our listeners who are not. We have the sun there. We have the moon there. We have Mercury really close by. Mercury's close to Pluto at 1 degree as well. And the new moon happened when the sun and the moon were both at 9 degrees of Aquarius as well. So a lot of Aquarius, but then you also have the Pisces party at the same time as this. So a lot of concentration in Aquarian and Pisces parts of the chart. Do y'all want to talk specifically about some of these lunations, or do you want to bring up the full moon chart to sort of briefly talk about that too?
I can bring up the full moon chart because let's look at both of them.
Okay. That sounds great. So for the Leo full moon, and let me give y'all a date for this one. So the Leo full moon happened on February 12th. And then Emily, can you share quickly the new moon chart? I forgot exactly what date it was. Okay.
January 29th.
Excellent. Personally, I felt this full moon like really intensely. And partially maybe it's just because there's a lot happening here. So if we're looking at the chart, we have, again, like a lot of emphasis in Pisces, but then we have the sun at 24 degrees. Also, Mercury is close by at 26 degrees as well, and it's opposing the Leo full moon at 24 degrees, which means that they are squaring Uranus at 23 degrees of Taurus. And I think I felt this one really a lot because Uranus is right on my moon in Taurus too. So I got the sort of spicy like T-square vibe happening directly on the part of my chart ruling emotions in my inner world. So to me, this really feels like either like a big aha moment, a big release point. Full moons are always release points, but there's sort of this like electric destabilizing energy that Uranus throws in the mix there. You have Mercury nearby too. So like this could have been a time for people to like, for clarity to come forth, or even more confusion. Like sometimes things come up and they complicate things where we have to think more about the situation or whatever is happening. Trying to think if there were
eccentricness of the Uranus energy square the Mercury Sun conjunction in Aquarius, like that, and the moon obviously in Leo. I mean that T-square. Just for listeners who maybe don't know what that means, a T-square is when there's two planets opposing each other and they both square the same planet. And it just is a really challenging configuration because they're all just at direct angles at each other or opposing each other. So they just all are having a different perspective, and it can just create like tension that needs to be worked through. It's a really powerful configuration though. It actually does bring forth a lot of movement and things like that. But it's just so you know, like when we're talking about this, we're talking about some kind of intense feeling energy. And then you have the Uranus, like breaker of chains, you know, as I'm talking about, super eccentric. And it rules Aquarius, Sun, and Mercury. Okay. And Mercury for me is a megaphone. Okay. So for example, I yelled at someone at work, my boss specifically on this day. You know what I'm saying? And it's because it was like a megaphone to some frustrations. And it's like, you know, that's like something Aquarius is an intellectual, intellectualizes things, doesn't get emotional, likes to put things into more of a, you know, detached state and keep things at a logical place. But you get the Uranus energy in there and it's like striking the fire, you know, and Aquarius can explode, have an eccentric reaction, detach, get away from something, you know. So I just want to like emphasize the Uranian influence on that Aquarius energy because Aquarius can be like, oh, I'm so logical and so, practical. And then suddenly like they'll have an emotional flash, you know what I'm saying? So I think that was kind of present from a lot of people I talked to during this full moon last Wednesday.
Yeah, and Uranus, since it's in Taurus, is ruled by Venus, and Venus just left Pisces, where it's exalted, and moved into Aries, where again we have that like almost relational spiciness, and Aries being a very, Martian sign, so it goes towards conflict. It's more of a knife as opposed to like soothing. So yeah, a lot of energy happening here. I will also note too that Aries is gearing up for a retrograde shadow. So already in 2025, we've experienced a lot of retrogrades with a lot of different planets as well. Mars is still retrograde currently in Cancer. And also, I will say too, let me see if it's in this chart. Kind of, but during Aquarius season, since Jupiter is at 11 degrees of Gemini, there were some nice trines when Aquarius, like the Sun and Mercury, were a little bit earlier in the sign too. So we do have like, yes, there's all this like explosive energy, but there's also this sort of effortless flow too, where it's like, Jupiter and Gemini have that like that trickster vibe, that curious, this almost like fairy vibe where they're flitting from subject to subject. There was a little bit of sort of, I would say, curiosity, fairy magic at the beginning of Aquarius season. So really, I think this is kind of a time where there's just I don't know, like a natural curiosity, or like letting that lead your perspectives of things too. So I think with all astrology, there's always like intensity, and also there could be like little moments of sweetness or gentleness or camaraderie where their planets are working together and there's more of a flow. Anything you two want to add before I go over the specific key dates that we'll reference as well?
We'll say Jupiter and Gemini. I think so much of the Trickster King being inaugurated, like in this Aquarius season, because I think of Jupiter as the king, and I think of Gemini as the trickster. And we're going to talk a little more about that in a minute. So I just wanted to shout that out. That also that Jupiter and Gemini trine may work against the collective, even though it's an easy flowing trine. It's an easy flowing trine for everybody, and that includes our trickster king. So just want to throw that out there.
Last thing to point out, and I'm sorry I took the chart down to prepare for our next graphic, but my astrology teacher Rowan wrote in their newsletter just how many planets are in signs of their detriment or fall. So we have the Sun in their detriment or exile in Aquarius. We have Jupiter in their exile in Gemini. We have Venus in her exile in Aries. And we have Mars in his fall in Cancer. And they're all talking to each other. So this makes it, right, it's not all doom and gloom when planets are not in their home signs, when they're in the opposites of their home signs. There's a frustration. There's a feeling of being out of one's element. But when we're out of our element, we have to get creative with how we adapt and how we respond to that environment. So that was something that I was like, oh, yes, all of these planets, like there's a lot of tension in this, in the collective right now. There's discord, and the planets are reflecting that.
Yeah, and I think the key is that it inspires a sense of resourcefulness where what we are used to having is no longer there. So what we have to rely on our creativity, our adaptability. It also sort of exposes our grit, like how much we can actually sustain, and even maybe even pushing our limits in a way where we're more capable of taking on more than we originally thought. So now we're going to talk about the key dates and transits, and Emily made this really nice graphic for those of you following along. If you're verbally listening as well, just note that if you want to take a look at the YouTube recording, we do have it all on a nice PowerPoint. So I'm just going to go through these quickly, and we'll reference and talk about these things more after. So the Sun in Aquarius lasts between January 19th, goes till February 18th. So as we are recording this podcast tomorrow, the Sun will ingress into Pisces. Like I said before, we had a Sun conjunction, or a conjunction between Sun and Pluto around January 19th to about the 21st. The new moon in Aquarius occurred on January 29th, and we had the Leo full moon February 12th, so a few days before Valentine's Day. Mercury is was in Aquarius as well as Pisces. So it was in Aquarius between January 27th to February 4th. So more recently just ingressed into Pisces. We had a cazimi. So cazimis are when a planet is at the exact degree as the sun. We had a Mercury cazimi from about February 8th to the 9th. And then Pisces, Mercury in Pisces will be from February 14th to March 3rd. Like I said, when we were looking at the charts, Venus was in Pisces at the beginning of the season and transitioned to Aries. And we are prepping for a Venus retrograde. So I'll talk about that in a second. But Venus was in Pisces from January 2nd to February 4th. Venus enters her shadow period around January 28th. When we say shadow, it's like we begin to feel a little bit of the qualities of Venus retrograde, but we're not fully in it yet. It's just almost like hints of it, sort of revving up and prepping. Venus moved into Aries on February 4th. We'll be stationing retrograde March 1st. So in a few weeks, we will start that retrograde cycle. And because it's happening at the earlier degrees of Aries, we will go back into Pisces as well. So the Venus and Pisces story is not over yet. We're going to have that movement back and then movement back in Aries. So we get a retrograde cycle that involves two different signs, which I think is very dynamic and interesting to think about. So Saturn in Pisces, originally Saturn moved into Pisces on March 7th, 2023, and will move out of Pisces from May 24th to 2025. So we have a little bit more time with Saturn in Pisces. And then also, Emily, just for clarification, is the next date that you have the September 1st to the 25th, that's when Saturn moves retrograde back into Pisces?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So for those of us with Saturn in Pisces during our Saturn returns, me included, you may think, oh, Saturn is out of Pisces. My retrograde or my time, Saturn return time is over. Technically not, because we will have another retrograde that Saturn does. We'll move back into Pisces. So September 1st, 2025, later this year, into the beginning of next year, February 13th, 2026. So we get that last arc of that specific energy there. In terms
Yay. I'm actually so happy about that, if I have to be honest.
We love Saturn and Pisces.
Yeah, especially because Saturn is now going into Aries afterwards, which is a very different vibe.
Terrifying a little, to be honest.
That's like
just
Saturn
kidding. Never be afraid of the astrology. Never be afraid of the astrology. I just have to say
that. Yeah. So then we have Jupiter in Gemini. Jupiter stationed direct February 4th. So we're now forward moving. All right. So that's a quick overview of all these important planets and the dates happening. I'm going to throw this over to Dani to talk more specifically about key issues and themes that are tied to these transits.
Thank you, Aryn. And thank you, Emily, for putting that graphic together. We're just getting better and better over here. And it's because we're a great team. It's been great. A little plug for those local to Milwaukee. Let us know if you're interested in coming to our little launch party on the equinox. If you are, let us know. We'll let you know where it is. Okay. Key issues tied to these transits. So one of the things is AI. Obviously, with Aquarius, Uranus energy, the innovator, technology, how technology impacts the collective. We have these new beings essentially that are being created. And the last time that Pluto was in Aquarius was during the Industrial Revolution. And so there is some sort of something about Pluto being the death planet, Aquarius being about innovation and technology, how technology really impacts the collective and shifts and changes the collective. And so AI is here. Okay. And I mentioned earlier that with Uranus and Taurus, AI is a huge drain on our resources, our Earth's resources, just as the Industrial Revolution reshaped much of what we knew about the Earth and how the Earth functioned, and shifted cycles and species and all of that. Just like the internet has done the same thing, the AI this is the next thing that's doing that. It's shifting how we work with our resources that we have access to in some beautiful ways and some very, very terrifying ways. For example, Emily was giving the example earlier when we were talking about this, about in Wisconsin, the governor of Wisconsin, Tony Evers, giving Microsoft tons of land, tons of Wisconsin's natural resources for some of their facilities for AI. And it's very scary, and it's going to negatively impact Indigenous communities primarily. That's usually the people who get impacted the most, is the marginalized communities, BIPOC communities, like poor people, like those are the people that are going to be impacted the most by climate degradation. And AI is a huge piece of that. And also, AI is a technology that I think of Saturn, the ruler of Aquarius traditionally. I think of Saturn as being about our responsibility a lot of times. And it's in Pisces. And to me, Pisces, one of the magic things about Pisces is the ability to imagine possibility. And so I am of the belief that I just don't see AI going away. I think that it's here and we must reckon with it. And so how do we imagine possibilities for AI as a tool that we could use, or really more not even a tool, because me being a Pisces moon, I'm like, AI is alive and we need to treat it with that respect. So like, seriously, how do we be in right relationship with it? So that's something I've been thinking a lot about. I'm like, do I go back to school to become like some sort of ethics person around AI, and like advocate for it? So that's one of the things that we're dealing with. I do wonder, like, is AI sentient? What makes sentience, does it have consciousness? Like, what is consciousness? There's a lot of big questions around it, which also feels very Aquarian, like higher learning, higher thought, philosophy and vision, and how we use it. And again, I think it's our responsibility to imagine a better way to be in relationship with it. Any other thoughts about AI before we move on to the next issue we want to kind of touch on? No? Okay, Emily, you want to talk about the Exodus?
One thing you said that made me just think about something I wanted to share about Aquarius in general is that Aquarius is like an idea generator, right? Like it's the mental body. And if Saturn is like, right, Saturn is like literally moving mountains in Capricorn, like physically building material structures. Whereas Saturn in Aquarius is more of the architect that's like generating ideas and visions of plans that Capricorn would then physically put into place, right? So that's like a way to think about air versus earth expressions of Capricorn. So another kind of thing that's really been amplified this Aquarius season, and thinking that Aquarius season began with Sun conjoined Pluto, and what happened under that conjunction in the cosmos, the inauguration of Trump happened on that day, January 20th. And who was up on stage with him? Like the most powerful men in the world, like, the president being one of the most powerful men in the world, in regards to like a colonial, global capitalist, imperial system, right? In those lenses, he is. And up there is all the tech bros, Elon Musk, Mark. I don't know if Mark Zuckerberg was up on the stage, but he's been very involved. He's donated $1 million to Trump's inauguration campaign. Obviously, he's been very buddy with Trump. And I think Jeff Bezos was also up there. So the richest men in the world up on that inauguration stage under this Sun-Pluto conjunction in Aquarius, right? So I think this level of visibility, one thing about Pluto that I've learned, I think I learned this from Chani Nicholas, I picked it up from her, is that Pluto is an exposer, right? Like all of the things that were in the shadows. And then when the sun comes with it, there's another element of exposing the secrets, of exposing what's happening in the dark and behind the scenes. And that's this whole thing that's playing out, this oligarchy that is forming, that was maybe that is becoming more and more exposed to the collective, which is all the tech CEOs that we've been talking about quite a bit on this podcast because it's been so relevant and becoming more exposed to us collectively. And so Mark Zuckerberg being one of those CEOs and him being the CEO of Meta, that operates Facebook and Instagram, two of the most widely used social media networks globally. And so with, I think, really, really that inauguration, I think these things were already being set in motion. People were already seeing, during the election season, just the tech bros really aligning themselves.
TikTok ban, all of that
Yes.
stuff. Mm-hmm.
Right? All of this kind of culminating, this
removing
perfect
their censorship
storm.
or their fact checking stuff in the name of censorship or whatever.
Yes, and we talked about that in previous Astro Church episodes, but just think of this storm that's been culminating, and now it's here at our front door, and it's been too obvious for the collective to ignore anymore. And so there's been this big, Aquarius season, kind of Pluto Sun in Aquarius initiating this, aligning with the timeline of the presidential inauguration in the United States, that made this very visible, this oligarchy very visible. So the collective response has been a mass exodus and a mass strike of Meta platforms. People leaving Instagram, people leaving Facebook. I have been on Substack for over 2 years at this point, and Substack is by no means perfect. There are many, valid, just stances for not using Substack, but that is just the platform that I'm on right now. But a lot of people coming over to Substack. I've been seeing lots of friends, lots of community members, lots of creative people that I follow coming over to Substack now, and leaving. And I read a lot of newsletters about people being I'm going to leave, or I'm going to take a break from Instagram and Facebook and these Meta platforms in particular because of one, all of the deregulation of the platform, right? To get rid of the fact checking, and just the obvious collusion with the CEO and founder and leader of these platforms with Trump, right? Someone...
The Broligarchy.
Exactly. So that feels very Pluto, Sun, and Aquarius, right? The collective coming together. Here's this very Aquarian system. These social media networks are very Aquarian in nature. Uranian and Saturn coming together, right? And people leaving, right? So,
and the Knight of Cups, the
yes.
moving through the illusion, the discernment through the illusion, the traveler, the one that moves things forward. In the tarot, there's also Knight of Cups energy there as well.
Absolutely. So, anything to add about this, or shall we move on to some of the other events?
Let's move on, Aryn.
So another thing that we're thinking about relating to this is just in general the chaos, especially the chaos that is stirred by Trump and Elon Musk. And I like that Dani is framing the Knight of Cups as sort of a court card to learn to embody in a positive way to navigate this. So there's a lot of it. Okay, in the chaos that they're stirring, right? There's policy chaos. So Trump is saying all this kind of stuff. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this, or I'm signing this executive order, and there's a sort of mass hysteria that he's causing directly from that. And there's almost a weird, sick pleasure that these men get. I don't know. It's very strange. But I think that there's the sort of emotions that they're stirring, right, is fear. They're tapping into material reality, right, by suspending or freezing funding for important things that people need to survive. And there's also a framework. I saw a really gross post where Elon Musk basically called people working class, basically anyone who's not a billionaire, the parasite class, which is so ironic, right? Considering that billionaires are actually the parasite class. Okay. But so yeah, it's interesting to see this weird scapegoating where they're kind of calling the kettle black, where it's a way to elude, or that's not the right word, a way to not actually take accountability for your actions and like project it onto other people. And a funny comment that somebody said where it's like, bro, you've gotten more tax breaks than like any of us combined. What are you talking about, the parasite class? So there's this idea of like part of their strategy, and because this is a strategy, is to destabilize. And it's smart to use social media or media platforms as a way to do this too. Because if you are constantly getting this like disruptive kind of narratives or ideas, again, it's a way that they're like realizing that there's a limit to their capacity, but they're trying to supersede that by just being like, well, if I do all this and this and like overstimulate you to the point where you shut down, so much easier to get a hold of like control and power. I will also say too, like Dani, you mentioned, or both of you mentioned, this idea of culmination. We didn't just arrive at fascism's doorstep, right? Like this has been building. It has been a part of our history. Part of, I think, Trump's appeal to people who voted for him is that he represented a sort of distinction from the politicians who want to maintain the status quo, who will be like, oh yeah, I'm for this and this, but their actions don't actually align. So there is a sort of like disillusionment that system has created. But I want to be very clear in saying that all of this is building and that there's a lot of pieces to it. And it's sort of like coming to the surface again, that Plutonian bringing the darkness within, where now it's on spotlight. But what I find really interesting is to see how people are contending with it, because there's a huge pendulum shift where like I do see the despair, the worry, the fear, the anxiety, and how that closes us, right? Because they're activating our shame, they're activating our powerlessness, they're activating the ways that we are isolated. By creating a platform that is very right-wing oriented, they are closing channels for us to connect, right? I also see the pendulum shift where people being like, actually, I have agency. You need my attention more than I need yours. And so this also reclaiming of like the power of the individual, of the collective, of how our choices actually do matter, especially when they are combined together. So I think that we're at this point, right, where these dichotomies have always existed. And I think Aquarius season is really illuminating literally the sun in Aquarius, bringing to light all these ideas. And so if we can then focus on the Knight of Cups energy, remembering that the Knight is of an air of ideas and thoughts and our perceptions, but also we are still holding something, and we can both hold our fear and our power at the same time, and try not to get so like lost in like the chaos stream, the chaos cycle. And that might mean deleting your social media apps, regulating your usage, which we should have already been doing, right? Like this is kind of like, again, there's a breaking point, and we are like, something has got to give. And it's really exciting to me actually to see, like, to hear conversations with how, like, what if the internet did go out? How would we communicate? How would we organize? Our ancestors have a lot of insight on how to do that too. Like, just because this is what's become normal doesn't mean that that's sustainable. And I think this is also a very Uranus and Taurus theme, Aquarius, Plutonian theme too, where it's like what we take for granted could be taken away. And also there's people in power who will make those changes and policy shifts. So how are we going to adapt? And also, like, how are we going to be aware of the strategies? And again, I'm like really emphasizing the idea of strategy, because this is not something like, yeah, Trump is somebody who's kind of like seems to operate by the seat of his pants, but also at the same time, this is like a strategic move. We've seen other examples of this in history. I feel like holding space for despair is important, and then also seeing how like that despair functions back, and then that puts us again in the cycle that they want. It's the same kind of thing as I think about when people talk about disengaging from folks who have like narcissistic tendencies. If your reaction, your response is like a feeding cycle for them. So if we're literally pulling our engagement, we're deleting their apps, we're thinking about our usage in healthy ways, that's already one way that we're breaking that like cycle that they are depending on. And so, yeah.
And there's also something, no, that was great. And there's something that Emily sent to our group chat at once. No, I'm sorry. I think it is in the Don't Believe Him episode with Ezra Klein that you sent. That was about how part of what's the strategy is to overwhelm us and to get us to center ourselves out of fear. And so there's something around the Knight of Cups. Now, I am not someone whose job has been directly impacted by these federal cuts, or like threat of federal cuts. So I'm going to say this and also just hold space for the reality that everybody needs to do what they need to do to take care of themselves. And I'm not here to give advice about any of that. I'm just saying that like there are going to need to be like, there is going to need to be some discernment around whether or not he really has the power to do the things he says he's going to do. Focusing on the things that are actually happening and not the things that are just threatened to be happening. And again, this feels very Knight of Cups energy of like trying to like holding all this kind of illusion and mystery and like the being in the water, you're underwater, you know, you can't discern exactly. Things are blurry, you know? And so it's like intuitively moving and also like being as discerning as you can be, the Knight being able to kind of see through to be like, okay, this is an actual threat. This is something he's using to distract us right now, you know? This is something that he's throwing at us just to like be a mean little, like a mean girl, you know what I'm saying? Like this is something he's doing to be a bully. And this is something that like he's actually like putting into place and we need to like organize around it, you know? So I just want to throw that piece of it too, that like, I think there's a need to see through, like not give him too much power in our brains too, you know? And I always like kind of resist the like free your mind and then everyone will be free. But like, this is a circumstance, especially in Aquarius season where I am like, we do have to like maintain some sort of integrity with our thoughts and stories we're telling and our minds and how we react to these things and the strategy, as you mentioned, that we use. Is there anything else about the Trump chaos that either of you want to say?
I think what you just said, Dani, is really important of how can we situate our politics so that we are not constantly reacting and responding to, especially responding to like hatefulness, right? And actually approach it with an ethos of love. And to me, like love is a strategy that is very quiet because it draws you back to the source. And I think the opposite of like the chaos and the hatred and the bully energy, like that is all very like will pull at you and take away a lot of your energy. And I think when Trump was first in office, we saw a lot of movements in response to him, right? But he's not the only, like again, that centers him. That puts him at the center of things, and he is not the center. He wants to make himself the center, and so do these other men who, like, again, it's more about like the ego and the power trip. But like, if we center our politics on him, we're gonna burn out. There's just too much to respond to. So that's at least what I'm thinking about for myself is I'm gonna focus my politics on like the fact that I fucking love trans people, not the fact that there are a bunch of people who are trying to take away our rights.
Universal shout out to that.
So something a little more lighthearted, kinda. It's not really lighthearted. It's in the same vein. And I know I'm wearing a Packers sweatshirt and we're about to talk about the Super Bowl. Now, here's a couple of disclaimers. First of all, totally like get the colonial patriarchal, like white supremacist nature of the NFL as an organization, of football as, you know, the exploitation of Black people in particular when it comes to the NFL and football. I also want to say that like my knowledge of football and interest in football is literally a cultural thing, like as an anthropologist at heart, because games and sports play an important role in culture. And for the American like experience, the Super Bowl and football are a huge cultural like event that happens each year that have a huge reach and have a lot of people's eyes on it. And an extra layer personally is that I work in the French Quarter in New Orleans, and that is where the Super Bowl happened this year. So it was very present for me personally. So I've done a lot of like thinking about this. And I just want to talk a little bit about the Kendrick Lamar performance. And the first thing I will say about it is that there was a person who was a dancer who used that platform to call attention to Sudan and to Gaza by raising a flag as they came onto the stage. They were censored out of the performance and they were arrested immediately. And they were disappeared for a while. I haven't seen updates because I'm not on meta platforms. I'm not on social media. So I don't know where they are, but I do want to like center that and focus on that because I think that's really important. And also I think it was a fascinating cultural moment to have the first rapper like solo rap performance at the halftime show, which is again a huge cultural event, has some of the largest reach that Kendrick Lamar took and ran with and turned it into a brilliant piece of art, in my opinion. So there, you know, I'm not going to break down all the symbolism. There's a lot out there. Emily, what was that person's name that you sent me that had the breakdown of the symbols?
His name is Richie Reseda. So we can link that in the show notes. He has a great breakdown of all the symbolism.
So just if you want to like know about the symbolism, one other thing I want to say before I get into this is we are 3 white people talking about this, and this is very much situated in the context of Black culture. So I'm not trying to comment on it, and I'm not commenting on Black culture. What I'm commenting on right now is how this man, Kendrick Lamar, used his that platform he was given, and came from the roots that he comes from and who he is as a person, as being someone who is a part of Black culture, specifically Compton, specifically LA culture, to play in the face of the trickster king, which is, you know, Trump. It was the first president to ever attend the Great American Game, as they put it. So Trump was in attendance. It's rumored that he walked out during this performance because Kendrick did it's very subversive. It like all the different symbols were connected to Black culture and Black people, and we're challenging certain narratives about the United States. Again, the NFL has particularly been known for exploiting Black people and Black culture. And it's just a huge part of the colonial machine and the colonial empire. So there's something really powerful about this moment, about this man from Compton performing on this huge platform for the dictator and playing in the dictator's place. Like there's points where Kendrick is like winking at the camera. Now he also has this Drake beef, and I don't want to talk about the Drake beef because that's been talked about and that's very clear. He associates Drake with the status quo and with the betrayal of the Black community and with colonialism. So like the Drake beef itself also is a commentary on colonialism and how prevalent things like sexual assault and pedophilia and disrespect of Black women is in the entire colonial empire and structure. So a lot of what he was bringing forth were symbols and dedication to some of those themes. And he did it all with a little smirk on his face. And he is a Gemini sun. He has a Pisces moon. Jupiter right now is in Gemini. We refer to Trump as the trickster king. Okay. And Jupiter and Gemini being Jupiter being the king, Gemini being the trickster, and Trump is a Gemini sun as well. So you have this Gemini sun, short little swaggy Kendrick Lamar, who is like literally calling out Trump, calling out empire, calling out colonialism on the biggest platform that he possibly could, and on live television, you know. It just feels very trickster king, trickster power struggle vibe. That is really kind of fun. The trickster king facing off with the trickster rebel. Again, I mentioned he like winks at the camera. He has so many plays on words. For example, he brings Samuel L. Jackson to be Uncle Tom, and Uncle Tom is or I'm sorry, Uncle Sam. He's Uncle Sam, but he pauses. He says, "I'm Uncle Sam." And there's also this reference to Uncle Tom, which is a Black person who betrays other Black people in service of white supremacy. That's like kind of the archetype of what that means. So he's like playing on words, Uncle Sam, Uncle Tom. This character of Uncle Sam is constantly commenting on the ghetto nature of Kendrick Lamar's music and his storytelling. Kendrick Lamar has a Pulitzer Prize. Like every choice this man makes, it dripping in symbolism. Everything is incredibly intelligent, and also just his flow and his use of words, like Gemini, Pisces. Like he's got this ability to like connect things, make connections. Even the trying to strike a chord, and it's probably A minor, like that whole connection to Drake and the colonial like nature and exploitation of children in that way. So he's this Gemini playing in the face of the trickster king, and he's also like has that Knight of Cups energy of like a force exposing illusions, seeing through the illusion, like, and doing it in a very like Mercury and Pisces way, like where it's like it's through storytelling, it's not directly saying it, it's through symbolism, it's through art, using art in this way to navigate kind of the deep waters of deception that we're all kind of living in right now.
Dani, can I point out a placement in his chart that speaks to this? So you said it's like Mercury and Pisces, and it totally is. So we have Kendrick Lamar as a Gemini sun. So here's his sun in Gemini in the 9th house. And he has Venus in Gemini, and this is Chiron, the wounded healer. But his Mercury, the ruler of Gemini, is in Cancer, which is ruled by the moon. And his moon is in Pisces. So we do get this moon in Pisces influence reflecting kind of over or through that his Mercury in Cancer would kind of channel through. So it is really this deep connection to the symbolism, the metaphor, the like you said, dripping with meaning and symbolism, this watery nature. Like it's so intuitive.
In his 10th house, in his house of his life's work and his career, and like it's conjunct Mars, you know. So like there's a element there of being the go-getter and like movement oriented and making things happen. And in this Cancerian way, like he's deeply connected to his community, to his, the people that he's responsible over, cares a lot about Black people, lifted up in his performance Serena Williams and SZA, like people who have been disrespected, Black women who have been disrespected by the establishment, music establishment, and just like colonialism in general, and celebrating them and nourishing his community through his storytelling, through the way he communicates, the art that he brings forth into the world. So really, and also like the Aquarius energy. Do you have anything in Aquarius? I know we're like choosing someone that has no Aquarius energy, but I mean, there is this Aquarius energy of like the innovative truth teller, and do we want to show the chart with the Super Bowl chart? Yeah, that would be great.
That Mars, almost exact Mars return with the conjunct moon too.
Yeah, look at that. Oh, whoa. Yeah, that's Mars in Cancer and moon in Cancer conjunct his natal Mercury and Mars in Cancer, which would mean he was going through his Mars return. That's like every 2 years we go through our Mars return-ish. And then, in his 5th house of creation, we have the transiting Pluto, we have transiting Sun, we have transiting Mercury. And that was on the day of the Mercury Sun Kazemi in his 5th house of creation. So it's like literally just spitting fire, like with the microphone, I would be so curious. I know we didn't prepare this, but I would be curious to look at his chart versus Trump's chart, just because I just love that imagery of just like this little man, just like to the dictator and making the dictator walk out. Like that is beautiful.
Yeah. Also thinking like when we've looked at the United States natal chart in a previous Astro Church episode, And I don't remember the degrees, but the United States has Sun and Jupiter in Cancer. And here
Sun
he
is at
is.
13. I know that. United
Okay,
States Sun
so
is
very
13
close to his
degrees.
Mercury and his Mars in Cancer. He's cutting to the truth about the real American story, right? And I also, one of the
illuminating.
things that Richie Reseda points out, which definitely watch his breakdown, but really highlighting all the Black dancers in the red, white, and blue, because Black people built this country, right? Like that universal truth that cuts to the core of like what real American history is. And Kendrick's Mercury and Mars in Cancer, and then being activated by the moon and Mars transiting through Cancer during the performance. He's cut into the heart of that in his performance, his art, all the people he's including and platforming with him. Very, very, that is like powerful art.
So powerful. I could talk about this for hours, but we are already at an hour and a half episode. So does anyone have anything else to say about the Kendrick Lamar stuff? All right, sweet. The only thing we have left, the section we have left, is to talk a little bit about the story we talked about earlier, which is the Peter Pan and the Lost Boys. Now, to be fair, I did rewrite that story a little bit to be more in line with, the themes that we were going to discuss today. But, these archetypes do persist when we look at Peter Pan. He's a innovative character, someone that is never gonna grow old. He resists the old. He embraces the new, the freedom. That feels Aquarius energy in certain ways, and he also is. It also feels Aquarius energy in that he's this individual who has this deep relationship to the Lost Boys, to this collective of people. And not just a deep relationship, but also a responsibility to them. He has a deep responsibility, sense of duty to these people. And I in the story, I framed it as, they all get along. There are power struggles that happen in the group of the Lost Boys. And I want to say that, like, that is I think, Emily, you talked about this, talking about Aquarius and its relationship to Leo. One of the things Aquarius is holding always is this duty to the collective, and also feeling outside of or feeling not a part of. And group work is always challenging. It's always uncomfortable. There's always all these different viewpoints and things that come together. And there's always going to be conflict. And that is uncomfortable. We want everyone to get along. We want to all agree all the time. And we don't always. And there are egos. There are power struggles. So I just want to throw that out there, that, like, if we are working in some sort of collective way and we don't feel good all the time, that is normal. It makes so much sense. That's just how it is. And also, we have the ability to do something greater. The Lost Boys escape Captain Hook because they work together to trick him, and they are innovative and creative in the way that they do that. And they also have a leader, an individual who takes on the responsibility to lead him and to play with words and to be a little trickster, again, like the short man playing in the face of the old order, and you think of Peter Pan and Captain Hook's relationship and how Peter is elusive and he's jumping from here into there, that feels like Saturn and Pisces energy, like the elusiveness of Pisces, but the, like, structure of Saturn and the ability to, like, actually accomplish something, which he did when he freed the Lost Boys and they all subjected Captain Hook to his demise. And there's also, like, the Pluto and Aquarius, like, old structures. Like, Captain Hook is so obsessed with Peter because Peter is young, and he's like, he doesn't like that representation. He wants to control things. He wants access to that. He's jealous. He's got his own ego. And eventually, like, his ego is used against him and he's overthrown. And again, the Lost Boys aren't following his rules. They're doing things from their own accord. It's like what you talked about, Aryn, like rooting not in the rules of the old order, but rooting in love and belief and in the possibilities that you and the people around you in your community are able to accomplish, and operating from that place instead of operating from a place of response or like, again, like being constrained intellectually by the rules of the old order or the oppressive order. Any thoughts around Peter Pan that I mentioned?
I really like the line when you were telling the story. I wrote it down. You said, where he relied on force, Captain Hook, they relied on belief. And I was like, that's so like a Jupiterian ideal of also what do we have at our resources? Like we might not have as the collective, we might not have access to the police state, right? To the immense amount of resources that billionaires have or whatever Captain Hook has. But there are things that we have that our enemies do not, that they lack. And so I just really love this story, especially in the context of what we're talking about in America, because I feel like the Lost Boys, they provide an alternative. And again, this idea that we talked last time of in Aryn and the Sea of Stories, like what's the point of stories that aren't even true? Like this is the point, because we connect them to our own realities. They help us understand our own realities, sometimes even in ways where we have to detach a little bit into the world of fantasy to be able to see things clearly, because sometimes it's like too hard or too complex to look at face on. So I love this idea. I also love the idea of this idea of childish energy being portrayed in a positive way. We often say people like adults are childish as an insult. And part of that is because children act in ways that are perhaps not as graceful because they're still learning, they're developing. But I love this framing of childish as like a superpower. And I will always advocate for childlike wonder and whimsy and perspectives as like a tool of liberation. One, because I've worked with children and they are fucking amazing and magical. And two, because I have the moon in Taurus in the 5th house. So there's always like, of course, like kids and their weird perspectives, and also like the fact that they are oppressed and they don't have power and their perspectives about things matter. And like, I don't know, I'm kind of going on a tangent, but I just love this, the Peter Pan sort of will never grow up. And that's actually what is like the source of their power, because their idea of growing up means like giving into the systems that be, right? Like kids often ask me like, why are things like this? Like, why are people listening to this? They look at adults and they're like trying to make sense of what they're doing in their own paradigm. And so I just think that, yeah, paying attention to what kids have to say. I miss being a teacher because I miss that proximity that I get to children and their perspectives on things. But they have an important perspective to say. And I honestly think their perception on like these ideas of like freedom and fairness are things that maybe we need reminders of as adults who get indoctrinated into the system. Kids are also going through that process too. Like it starts very young, but I think that they're able to poke holes in ways that are really useful for adults to pay attention to and listen to. Especially their central tenet of play, and they do not see play like we see play, where adults often see play as break from monotony or like, oh God, I need to like go relax or blow off steam. Like kids are doing it because they want to and it feels good. And I need to remind myself of that. The purpose of play and doing whatever you want because it feels good is like that's so radical that it doesn't tie into any sort of paradigm of like productivity or even seeing rest as normal so that you can be productive the next day. I just like, they just want to play on the playground because their friends there and that looks like fun. And I would like to go down a slide too every once in a while.
Also, like play does connect people together, and that's something that I see with this story. It also is expansive. When I think of Saturn and Pisces, I think of like the structures, and I think of Pisces being so expansive, and we need that to discern the chaos and mess that like the world order is giving us. Like we need to be able to think outside of the confines that they want to keep our brains in. And that's why they're cutting off communication channels, as you said earlier, Emily. That's like why they're they're limiting us because they don't want us thinking outside of the box. They don't want us imagining something better. And that's something that we have a responsibility to do. Like, we have to do that. And you know, that's kind of the part, one of the things that I think really brings out the Aquarius season nature of this story is like, it's a collective of people that are connecting in unconventional ways around unconventional beliefs, and like around the idea that they all want to just be free to have that experience. What you're talking about, Aryn, like to just do things because they want to and because it feels good and not because they have to or anything like that. And how that perspective and that foundation allows them to have the creativity and the innovation to be able to actually defeat their enemy, you know, which is, again, they were able to defeat him using his own limited beliefs and ego and all of that stuff against him. Do you have anything you want to say, Emily, about any of this? No? Can we move on to the final part of the... Thank you all for holding space for that. Aryn, you want to take it away with our personal reflection?
Yeah, so at the end of each Astro Church, we like to state a question or a couple questions to think about as we move through the week and the months. And also, if listeners want to share your reactions to this, there are a few channels that you can do that with. One is when we upload these episodes on YouTube, you can directly comment for us to see. As well as we do have a new form that you can do two things with. You could either submit a universal shout out for us to share in our next Astro Church, or you can share your reflections on some of these questions. And so that's something you don't have to do, but if you want to take that opportunity to think through these questions, to have a forum to articulate, you can find that form either in the show notes in the information for this video, or if you are connected to us on Instagram, if you go to our profile, we have a link tree, and there is a link to a form in there that you can check out. So the question that we will leave you with, or questions that we will leave you with, are this. As we move through challenging times, how can we stay connected to our collective vision without falling into despair or illusion? How can we build and nurture resilient communities that reflect our courage and resistance? What role can we as individuals play in this collective transformation? So again, reminder that you can share these with us via comment or form. And this has been our Aquarius season Astro Church episode 6. Thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to connecting with you all on Pisces season.
Bye, y'all.